Hello and welcome to Volume 101 of Capital Ideas Live. In today's issue, we'll discuss the result of the Alabama special vote that authorized using non-recurring natural resource revenue for general fund expenses. We'll talk about the fiscal cliff that we face when the estate tax law changes. We'll talk about wild pigs, and we'll check on how the timber market is behaving. I'm Hayes Brown, the General Counsel of the Alabama Forest Owners Association, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Our first guest is Dr. Ian Munn, who's a professor of forest economics at Mississippi State, interim associate dean as well. Welcome, Dr. Munn.
Welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Munn, the old way of doing things was to plant pine trees, thin out the pulpwood for a little money, and then try to hold on till it produces sawtimber. What are the major market changes that are impacting forest owners today?
Well, I think there's no secret to everybody who grows trees is that the sawtimber market has absolutely plummeted since 2007. Prices are down about 35%. Here in Mississippi, the returns to forest land are at historic lows. But over top of that, we hear all this talk about a lot of talk about emerging biofuel markets. Markets for wood pellets, bio-oil, cellulosic ethanol, and biodiesel. So the landowner's faced with, here's this promising product coming online in the future. Our traditional markets are not very good right now. Should that have any impact on how I manage my timber? And basically, that's what our study was designed to answer.
Well, tell us about that, where the biofuel fits in the other forest product mix.
All righty. Well, at this point in time, and the original impetus was we have a lot of logging residues and first or pre-commercial thinning volumes that really aren't suitable for pulpwood, and if we could use those for biofuels, that would be great. And why was that attractive? Well, because there was little or no cost for that raw material. It was something that was discarded. What are the consequences of that? Well, really, there's little to no impact on our optimal management. The volume of logging residues is relatively small compared to the volumes of pulpwood and sawtimber that are harvested. And if you take something with low volume and low value, that has a very low impact on your management. But in the future, we're looking at biofuels becoming more in demand and therefore becoming more cost competitive. So as demand for biofuels increases, they're going to want to pay. They'll be able to pay more for raw material, and they'll need more raw material. That's when prices for biofuels raw materials are going to go up, and at some point they're going to become comparable to pulpwood prices. And at that point in time, pulpwood may be utilized for biofuels.
Talk to us about plantation management in light of what you're discussing and how these changing markets for both sawtimber and biofuels are going to affect the optimal decisions that people have to make.
Okay. Well, the landowner basically has an option of growing timber on a sawtimber rotation or a pulpwood rotation. Now, obviously, there's a lot of gradients in there, but those are basically the two primary options. Pulpwood, and by pulpwood in this scenario where fuelwood is comparable to pulpwood, we have those rotations we would typically think of no thinning, high initial stocking, or relatively shorter rotations. Sawtimber, we think of lower initial stocking, one or two thinnings, and longer rotations. And it's the relative product prices that end up affecting what the desired forest products are, end products are, within a broad range of other conditions. So what we did is we looked at the optimal rotation age that maximized land expectation value, or the landowner return, for a variety of the whole mishmash of interest rate, site index, minimum alternative rate of return, desired end products, etc. And what we look for is when would the landowner be better off growing on a pulpwood rotation versus sawtimber rotation.
Okay. What did you find out?
Well, we had to do two things. First of all, we looked at the range of historic prices, and historically, pulpwood has varied relative to sawtimber roughly in the range of 20 to 30% of sawtimber values. And right now it's in the mid to high 30s, so it's we're a little high in the range, but not too far out.
Okay.
And then we looked at at what point would the landowner be indifferent about growing pulpwood versus sawtimber? Where's the break-even point, I guess, or the switch point? So we did all those simulations and basically came up with the current results were that Sawtimber rotations are still optimal at current product prices. And so that was a little bit surprising, but through all the range of different site indexes, you're, with the exceptions of some very low site indexes, you're still better off growing Sawtimber at current product prices.
Okay. Well, we'll also link to some more information on that if people would like to know some more about it. Thank you, Dr. Munn. Okay. We appreciate that. Thank you very much.
All right.
Well, you probably already heard of the fiscal cliff that our economy is headed toward. Part of the fiscal cliff deals with changes in the estate tax law. Scott Drinkard has run up ahead and scouted out the cliff, and he's returned back to tell us about it. Hello, Scott.
Thanks for having me on the show, Hayes.
Glad you're back from the cliff. Tell us about the current situation with the estate tax and how the changes in the next few months will affect estates.
Well, the federal estate tax is one of the more sporadic taxes that we've encountered. Back in 2001, the first Bush tax cut was passed, and that part of that package was raising the exemption slowly on the estate tax, meaning less estates were applied, that had the estate tax applied to them, and then lowering that rate. And it was gradually done until a total repeal in 2010. Then it was supposed to revert back to 60% rates. Now, they reached a 2-year, so to make that clear again, they repealed the tax totally in 2010, and then it was supposed to revert to 60%, which I think is very strange. They reached a 2-year compromise with a $5 million exemption and a 35% top rate. That's the current structure. Now, in 2013, if no action is taken, that rate is going to drop. The exemption is going to drop to $1 million, and the top rate is going to rise to 55%.
Okay. You've made the case that an outright repeal of the estate tax actually benefits the economy and reduces income or reduces inequality, which is kind of hard to understand. How does that work?
Sure. So we've actually seen quite a few economists that are left of center coming out and saying that Joseph Stiglitz being one of them and Larry Summers being another, who both worked in high-ranking positions under President Clinton, and one of them has a Nobel Prize, arguing that the estate tax is really bad for capital formation because every generation, it's hard to find the ideal scale for your business if every generation, half or more, depending on what the rate is that year, is taxed away from your estate. Additionally, on the inequality side, Joseph Stiglitz argues that you're locking capital in to particular businesses, and that's going to drive up returns on capital, which largely benefit wealthy holders of capital. So he argues that it's better for inequality if you actually let the estate tax go away.
Okay. If you assume that the estate tax is repealed, how's the government supposed to make up with the revenue that's lost?
Well, this is one of the positive messages here. Oftentimes, if you repeal a tax, you have to make provisions to raise another tax to keep revenue streams at the same level, or you have to make spending cuts associated with repealing that tax. And on the estate tax side, it really only makes up roughly 1% of federal revenues each year. So it's a very, very small collection and a lot of hassle for all that collection. There's a ton of estate planning associated with trying to sidestep the tax, legally do so, in fact. But the estimates have found that, in 2 counts, you're going to see greater economic growth. First part is that the waste that's associated with the estate tax, which has been estimated to be greater than the total revenue it actually collects in terms of estate planning, et cetera, that goes away and people are employed in other jobs that lead to more growth. And then additionally, people earn more due to the incentives to pass on wealth to their heirs, because currently there's a sort of die broke mentality because of the estate tax. Sure. So with those two involved, you have the estimates are showing that it's revenue neutral and in some cases revenue positive to repeal the estate tax.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate that perspective.
All right. Thank you. Our
next guest will discuss wild pigs, and the fact that he follows a discussion about Congress is purely accidental. Stephen Ditchkoff is with us. Hello, Stephen.
Good morning.
Wild pigs, why are they such a problem in the U.S.?
Well, first of all, they're a non-native species. They were originally introduced to North America in the early 1500s by Hernando de Soto, and early explorers introduced them all along the coasts. In recent years, we've had significant range expansions across the United States. They're now present in 47 of the 50 states. That's up from about 30 in the low 30s back in the mid to late 90s. A lot of hunters are moving around, so we're having them pop up in a lot of places where they were not originally found. The reason they're such a problem is they cause problems to agricultural crops. They have the potential to spread diseases to the domestic swine industry. They predate many terrestrial species. Their rooting causes problems with invasive plant species. It's estimated that across the United States each year there's over $1.5 billion in damage due to wild pigs each year.
Is it possible to hunt or trap these into in existence on your property?
There's a lot of people think that hunting and trapping is an effective solution, that forms of lethal control are effective, and in very few circumstances is that actually the case. What people need to realize is that this is probably the most intelligent animal that we have walking around out in the wild in North America. Their level of intelligence is outstanding, which makes them very difficult to deal with normal lethal control practices that we're familiar with. Combine that with the fact that this is the most reproductively prolific large mammal on Earth. We have to keep in mind that the animals, the wild pigs we have walking around, are largely descendants of domestic stock, which were selectively bred to maximize reproduction. So to compare a wild pig to a deer, where a deer will have its first fawn on its second birthday, by the time a female wild pig reaches 2 years of age, she may have had 12 to 15 piglets. And so the problem is with lethal control that you can kill lots of pigs, but they reproduce faster than you can get rid of them.
Is it possible to give them birth control?
We're exploring some options for contraceptives here at Auburn University, and we started a project here a couple of years ago looking at developing an oral species-specific contraceptive for wild pigs. Contraceptives have been on the market and they've been, something that's very common with groups like PETA and the Humane Society of the United States, that sort of thing, as far as humane control of animals. The reality is there's not a good contraceptive out there for use with any free-ranging species at this time because it requires some sort of injection or something like that. What we're wanting to do is to develop an oral species-specific contraceptive, something that can be put out in a bait that only affects wild pigs. The problem we're running into, or not a problem we're running into, but the problem to date is there's never been an oral species-specific contraceptive developed for any species on Earth, humans included. So we're plowing some new ground here that has the potential to, be very positive for both wild pigs and potentially for other pest species across the United States.
Okay.
We will say up front that it's probably not going. Contraceptives in and of themselves are not a solution to the problem, but they're one tool in the toolbox that can help slow reproduction to allow lethal control to work.
Okay. All right, Stephen. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Now, this program takes place the day after the statewide election in Alabama, which approved a 3-year transfer of funds from offshore oil and gas revenue to the general fund. Andrew Kinnaird is with the nonpartisan Alabama Policy Institute. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello, Mr. Brown. How are you doing?
Since the vote passed, what do you think is next for the state?
Well, essentially what's going to happen is the budget, as enacted, will take effect. And so that's a good thing in one sense, and because the legislature doesn't need to go back into special session. But,
in other words, they already passed this. They already passed their budgets assuming that this would pass.
Correct, yes, sir. But part of the passage of this bill relates directly to the Alabama Trust Fund, and as a result, the principal of the trust fund will fall, which will, of course, cause the investments from the fund to decrease, as well as investment companies look at the trust fund as a significant asset for the state. So it may lead to bond ratings going down as well.
Okay. Now, what do they do with $437 million that they're going to transfer? Where does that money go, and what's it supposed to be used for?
Well, if you read the ballot language, it says it's going to be used for prisons and health services, but this isn't necessarily true. In the actual Senate Bill 147 that passed, it said nothing about what the funds specifically are going to be used for. In fact, $145 million has already been budgeted, like we said, in this fiscal year 2013 state general fund budget. Now, first of all, in that budget, there was a part that was conditionally budgeted conditioned upon the passage of the amendment, and $415,000 was already going to other things like the Historical Commission, Ethics Commission, Development Office, Economic Community Affairs. And so if you just kind of extend that assumption, it's not too much of a stretch to assume that these funds aren't just going to be used for health services in prisons. And furthermore, the rest of the $437 that isn't budgeted this year is going to be budgeted like any other funds in the next 2 coming years.
Okay. Well, regardless of that, isn't it going to help the state get through this difficult time?
Well, sort of. The amount that's being transferred isn't going to put a huge dent in helping or saving the world or anything like that. When you're only adding 8% you're only increasing a budget 8%. I mean, what effect is that really going to have? And really one of the reasons that the trust fund needed to be used to shore up the state general fund was because the federal government stimulus packages that had been coming in the past couple of years have ended. And so now, instead of using federal stimulus, we're using state stimulus. And it's just kind of one of those things. We've got through the tough economic time, the recessionary period, and we're kind of still in that. But nevertheless, significant changes need to take place. You can't just keep shoring up your budget every year with hopes of a stimulus to come through.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Andrew. We appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
Hopefully your consultant uses a written contract when he sells your timber, but have you ever wondered where that contract comes from? Who prepared it? Chad Hancock, who's chair of the Georgia Division of the Society of American Foresters, has dealt with an issue with foresters when they were accused of the unauthorized practice of law. Hello, Chad.
Hey, how are you doing this morning?
How did this issue of foresters practicing unlicensed law come to the attention of the Georgia bar?
Well, there were a couple of attorneys here in Georgia that had prepared form contracts for consulting foresters to use for their clients, and those consulting foresters used those same form contracts and replaced the name, property information, and other things about the timber sale, and used those contracts again and again. And the attorneys presented
some sort of complaint to the state bar.
They asked for an advisory opinion. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
They sent that to the state bar and asked for an advisory opinion on whether or not the consultants were practicing unlicensed law by using these standard form contracts over and over.
Okay. I know your group, which is the SAF of Georgia, y'all had a response to that, and just kind of summarize what y'all's position was on it.
We had a lot of conversation within our group and looked at some of the laws that represent, what is practicing unlicensed law. Well, one of the key things is charging a fee for preparing a contract between two parties. Our key point was that we don't specifically charge fees for preparing the contract. Our expertise in the timber markets, analyzing the timber sale, estimating volumes, all of that is incorporated into our commissions of timber sale, and we don't specifically charge a fee for preparing a contract. That is, the landowner has the option of using a contract of their own or hiring an attorney if that's what they wish. So that's kind of one of the key points that we hit on. Another one was, that there are several other groups out there that use these standard form contracts. We felt like if one group is going to be penalized for using a form contract that's already been prepared by an attorney, where you fill in the blanks, that, we shouldn't be penalized and have to deal with, going through the extra steps of an attorney being involved in every timber transaction and undue expense on our clients or forest landowners.
Let me ask you about the groups that were involved in this and responding to this before the committee. Who all was involved in it?
Well, the groups that I'm aware of were the Georgia Division of the Association of Consulting Foresters, of course the Georgia SAF that I'm the chair of, the Georgia Forestry Association, the State Board of Registration for Foresters, and the Georgia Forestry Commission. There were several independent consultants that also, attended the hearing, and they gave their presentation to the committee on, the ins and outs of historical use of these form contracts, and that, you know, a lot of this that is being discussed was not going to benefit the public in any way by having to have an attorney present in any timber sale closing.
Now, what was the ultimate outcome? How did it turn out?
We had a favorable response from the committee that foresters are not practicing unlicensed law when they are using standard form contracts. You know, as many consultants do, we advise our clients to seek legal counsel if they're not familiar with the terms of the contract or the legal ramifications. But this has been a big win for foresters in the state of Georgia.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chad. Appreciate that. Wireless technology can be used to operate cameras, which are used for security purposes, among other things. These can include monitoring farm buildings and other remote assets. Bill Moffitt is the president of Airstone Productivity, and his company produces a Wi-Fi booster that improves performance. Hello, Bill.
Hello, thank you.
A lot of us have these Wi-Fi routers in our homes, and sometimes we can't get a signal. But how does your product differ from a normal Wi-Fi router?
Well, in a couple of ways. The first thing is that we observed that rural residents, people who lived out in the country, have multiple buildings, and they need to have access to the Internet from all those buildings. And the second is that Wi-Fi routers tend to have very weak signals. They use about 100 milliwatts, 1/10 of a watt of transmitting power. So what we did was we took the Wi-Fi outside and up above the building with an outdoor mountable Wi-Fi antenna called the Air Mesh Hub that puts out a full watt of power, the most allowed by the FCC or the IC in Canada.
Okay. Given to understand that these things don't work very well in timber stands very well, are there some limitations in using this product that you're talking about?
Yeah. One of the reasons to take the Wi-Fi outside is that Wi-Fi doesn't go well through walls or through trees. By getting it outside, we can maximize the range of that Wi-Fi signal so that it doesn't have to go through the walls of your house in order to get to your yard or out to your outbuildings. And that way, we get the most out of it.
Okay. Talk to me about the cameras that are used in connection with this. How are they used and what are they useful for?
Well, we've recently begun selling what we call the Air Scout line of IP cameras. They actually work off the Wi-Fi signal so that you can view them anywhere on your property or even across the Internet. And they can be paired up with a piece of equipment called a network video recorder to make a security system that will record anything that happens on your property, as well as do things like detect movement and record when it sees something move, or just keep an eye on things. They're handy both for security and just for general awareness of what's happening on your property. If you've got something you just want to keep an eye on throughout the day or in the middle of the night, you can just put a camera on it and not worry about it. Just check it from your phone or your laptop or your tablet.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting, Bill. Thank you for cluing us in on that. We appreciate that very much.
All right. Thank you.
Carl Weidman is a New York woodlot owner, and he's had the chance to reflect on his experiences in owning a working forest. We thought we had an interesting story there, so we want to check in with him. Hello, Carl.
Hi, Hayes.
Tell us about the history of your woodlot before you purchased it.
We bought a woodlot that had been, I guess I would say, originally back in the 1800s, it was probably forest, but that forest was cleared and it was farmed, and then the farm was abandoned in the late 1800s, and it grew back to trees. Those trees were, the owner back in the 60s had all the best trees cut out of it. So when we bought it in the 80s, or 1980, we had what you would call a degraded woodlot.
Okay. Now, have you used the timber harvesting to improve it? Is that one of the tools that you've selected?
Yes, and that has really been a positive experience because I think a lot of landowners, and I'm talking now about hardwood lots that have a mix of tree species and tree values. And these eastern hardwoods, of course, are not just in New York State, but they go all the way down to Alabama. those forests are typically cut from the standpoint of how do I get the most money for my timber sale?
Mm-hmm.
So a landowner sells the trees, and the best, most valuable trees are cut out of the lot. And that basically means the future sale, the next sale, is going to be quite a bit less.
Mm-hmm.
So if you turn that around, and instead of cutting the best trees out of it, you cut the worst trees out of it, you can substantially change how the value of that woodlot grows over the time to the next harvest.
Okay.
And that's basically what we did. As soon as we bought that lot, I had a timber sale, but it was firewood and low grade logs.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the lessons that you've learned in doing this?
Well, there are, again, there's several things that happen when you think about a woodlot. It is, it's like a solar cellulose factory, and it's going to pump out a certain amount of cubic feet of cellulose every year, and the quality and value of that wood that's growing in your woodlot is going to depend on the trees that are standing in the woods. So one thing is that you want to keep high-value trees in your woodlot to grow for the future. Another lesson is that you need to have a timber sale occasionally to keep to optimize the growth on your best trees, because woodlot will grow every year, and it's going to get the stocking gets heavier and heavier. If you can keep the stocking down to about 60%, that will basically take all of the solar energy and concentrate it on the trees that you've left there. If you cut the woods, you can really concentrate the growth on the most valuable trees.
Okay.
And that was another thing that we tried to do. And
right.
You can see I've been inventorying that woodlot now for the last 30 years, and I go through and count all the trees over 16 inches and figure out what the values are and take a look at what's been happening. And it's really, when we started out and bought it in 1980, it was growing at about $4 an acre of a year. That was the value of the annual growth.
Mm-hmm.
This last inventory that I did, it's up to $50 an acre a year.
Huh. Okay.
And that's over 30 years, which is not really not a lot of time. That's a relatively short period of time in a hardwood stand.
Sure. Well, that's interesting, Carl. Thank you for that. Hands-on work there. It's very interesting. Well, in our markets chair is Daniel Stuber with Forest to Markets. Hello, Daniel. How are you?
Good, Hayes. How are you doing today?
You wrote an interesting blog, and it goes something like this: more construction, more lumber equals more sawtimber equals lower sawtimber prices. And you showed how Forest to Markets pricing data, how sawtimber prices have actually gone down over the last 5 years, while demand has improved. The prices haven't. So I wanted you to tell us why that's going on. What is going on in the market right now?
Right. Really what we've observed, especially lately in the first half of this year, is we've seen a gradual improvement in housing starts and in overall construction spending. And naturally that's created demand for lumber and solid wood materials such as plywood and OSB. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, our sawmills and ply mills in the industry have really learned to operate on lean, just-in-time log inventories at their mills. Mm-hmm. And so as this housing market and construction has improved, these mills have obviously needed logs to produce lumber, and naturally they've put that demand out on the market. But what has been interesting to us and what we've seen in our data is that as these mills have gone to the market requesting more saw logs, we haven't seen chip and sawtimber prices go up as we normally would. We've actually seen them decrease.
Okay, so demand's up, but the prices aren't corresponding with that.
That's correct.
Okay,
and, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me ask you about this phenomenon. How long you think this is supposed to last?
Well, that's a good question. what we're, simply put, home building and construction in the United States is highly tied to employment, non-employment. And we feel that until we're really beyond this 8% unemployment rate in the U.S., we're not going to see a dramatic change in construction patterns. If we look at 2010, 2011, unemployment was about 9.3% on average over that time frame. And we were constructing about 600,000 homes annually at that time. This year, unemployment's dropped about 1%, and we're on pace to really produce about 730,000 homes. So it's taken us 2 years to improve unemployment by 1% and add 130,000 homes annually in the U.S. And so, our trend line is about 1 million housing starts in this country.
That's sort of a baseline people can keep in mind, 1 million housing starts per year, right?
Right, that's correct.
All right.
And so right now we're at about 730. So at that rate I just quoted you, 130,000 per 2 years. At that rate, we're still really 4 to 5 years away from reaching that million home starts a year.
What do you recommend that landowners do in light of what you're discussing here?
Well, what we've got in the market right now is really an oversupply of sawtimber. Our landowners, what we've observed in the last few years is that they're holding on to their timber. And my advice would be, depending on the age of your timber and what your goals are in timber management, is to stick to those goals, but if you can, don't delay harvest. We feel like we're still, another 5 years out before we're going to really see improvement in sawtimber pricing. And so if your management plan, if your consulting forester is telling you to cut your timber now, don't delay. The risk is that your timber could become unhealthy, and also the bigger your timber gets, you're limiting the amount of sawmills that can come and buy that timber and harvest that timber.
All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. Appreciate that. And that's all the time we have for this issue. Our thanks go to Ian Munn, Scott Drinkard, Stephen Ditchkoff, and Andrew Kennard. We also appreciate the contributions of Chad Hancock, Bill Moffitt, Carl Weidman, and Daniel Stuber. This issue of using revenue from oil and gas exploration to fund general budget items was a topic of discussion recently. The voters of Alabama overwhelmingly approved this practice, but those that didn't pointed out that these are non-recurring revenues. Well, that all depends on your time frame. Certainly 650 million years, which is the time it takes to produce oil and gas, could be thought of as non-recurring, but it just goes to point out that timber, on the other hand, is a renewable resource, can be grown, harvested, and grown again, and that's something we can all celebrate. On behalf of the Alabama Forest Owners Association, I'm Hayes Brown. Thank you for joining us for this issue of Capital Ideas Live.